Record.
And I'll click the video off and hit mute.
Okay, I'm going to mute everybody, I think. Here we go. Okay. One thing I want to mention before we get started is that this was the last meeting that I had in my recurring meeting in Zoom. So when I created the next set of meetings, it required me to use a different meeting ID. So our meetings going forward are going to have a different meeting ID. So if any of you have set it up somewhere where you're always putting the same meeting ID or whatever, that's going to change. Now, the link is going to have to change too. And I think that the meeting ID is embedded into the link, so it probably doesn't make any difference, but I wanted to be sure and mention it just in case. And I'll also put that information on the meetup page because I put the meeting ID and the password on there. And I don't know if you even need those whenever you log in, but just in case, I wanted to make sure you knew. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. My desktop, I think. Here we go. All right. And go here, Photoshop. Okay. First thing we're going to talk about, and by the way, any of you that haven't been on this before, just so you know, it's very informal. If there's anything you want to interrupt me with or talk about or whatever, just feel free to jump right in and ask a question or tell me I don't know what I'm talking about or whatever, and that's okay. But the first thing I want to talk about is just in general. It's not really about Photoshop itself, but it's about resolution. And the reason I want to talk about this because I keep hearing different things about what people's understanding of resolution is, and I just don't think that people really get it. And that's my opinion. That's another thing, you new folks. I'm only giving my opinions. You feel free to disagree, but I think that there's been a little bit of misunderstanding about what resolution is all about. And so I actually went out to Wikipedia and found out that I had a little bit of not misunderstanding necessarily, but a little different viewpoint of resolution than what Wikipedia said. And the two basic points I want to make is that most people think of resolution as the number of pixels you have. If you have a 45 megapixel camera, you have more resolution than if you have a 24 megapixel camera. So it's pixel count that's a big deal. But my personal opinion on resolution is more about pixels per inch than it is about how many pixels you have. And so I want to just kind of show you some images and to kind of bring that home. So I'm going to open a couple images here. And I should have already had these open right here. They're going to come to camera raw because these are raw images. And just so you know, whenever I open a raw image, I have a preset in my camera raw that opens, that actually clicks on auto here to give me an auto picture, right? Auto adjustments to give me something to start with. But I'm going to turn those off so that we can see these images straight out of camera. So you can see here, this is an image in New York City. I was walking around with a friend of mine there, and this is a picture. I really don't know what it is, but I think it's a Jewish temple in downtown New York City. Excuse me. This image here was taken on our trip to Cattle Mills, or excuse me, Cattle Lake. I keep calling it Cattle Mills. Our trip to Cattle Lake, this is actually, Susan, you're gonna have to help me, where this is the nature park that we went to before we, Lake Quitman, that's where it is, Quitman Nature Park, that we went to before we went to actually to Cattle Lake. both of these, I think, are pretty good images. And I'm going to do a little bit of opening up on these so you can see what I'm talking about. So if I don't use the auto, you
Bob,
can, yes.
I think Susan is both camera free and mic free, so you really can't. You can talk
Okay.
to her, but she can't talk to you.
Okay, well, I remember this is like outside equipment, but for some reason I have a mental block on that name, but that was what I was referring to. But thank you. I didn't know that she couldn't talk, but I thought she could, come in on the chat.
Well, she did. Never mind.
Anyway, thank you for that. But I don't know, you probably know that you can do this in Lightroom, but you can do it in Camera Raw as well. If you come over here and hover over the histogram, you can see that this part is the shadows, this part's the exposure and so on. You can also grab this and move it out and just pull it over and let it move the sliders for you, which is what I do sometimes. So if you just kind of open it up right here, you get a little bit better idea of what this image looks like. And it probably could use even some more opening up. So maybe move this over a little bit. There we go, something like that. Now I don't know how this looks on your screen. It's looking a lot better now here on my screen. I'm going to do the same thing with this other image. And we're going to take, this is the shadows, and I'm going to push it, and you can see, actually that's the blacks. I push the blacks all the way over to 100. And now I'm going to come in here and push the shadows up, and it's going to pull those shadows up pretty good. And then I'm going to bring the highlights down. So, you can do this a number of ways. This is just what I'm doing right now, just for the heck of it, just to kind of show you that you could do that. I don't usually do that, but I used to do it all the time. It's just kind of a different way of making your adjustments. But I wanted you to look at this image. If you come in here and look, this is a pretty sharp image. It's not a great image by any means, but the whole point of this is resolution. If you look at this, it's pretty sharp, it's pretty good. And even if you come in here and add a little clarity, which I love clarity slider, pull that over, then it adds a little bit more contrast and a little bit more detail in there as well. Might want to add a little, bring up the shadows just a little bit more. So it's a pretty nice image. And then if you look at this one, you can do the same kind of thing. Again, I love that clarity slider. Pull it over and look what it does to that image. It really makes it pop. And you can see that there's quite a bit of detail in this image too. Now, the reason I'm using these two images and trying to point it out is that this image right here was shot with a D700. And if you look down here at the bottom, you can see that that's a 12 megapixel camera. And if you look at this one over here, this was shot with my D850, which is a 45 megapixel camera. So the whole point here is which has better resolution. It depends on what you're talking about. Now, if you look at, again, refer back to Wikipedia, it says there's like 5 different kinds of resolution in there. One of those is called pixel count, which is the one I mentioned a minute ago. If that's the case, it's no brainer. The 45 megapixel has better resolution. But the other one is called spatial resolution. Then that's the one that I like. That's the one that I refer to, and the one that I always think about when I think about resolution. And that is, what does it look like when they have the similar pixels per inch? In this case, both of these are straight out of camera. They don't have any pixels per inch right now. So if you look at them straight out of camera and you bring them both in, this little down here tells me that I'm set up to bring them into Photoshop at 300 PPI. If I bring them both in at 300 PPI, they're both going to still have this same comparable resolution, spatial resolution, pixels per inch type resolution. And that's what I think is important. The only time, in my opinion, again, that 45 megapixels makes a big difference is when you need to make a bigger print. Now, let's think about that too. If I have this, oops, sorry about that. Backblaze wants to start. And if that slows me down, I'll go pause it. But Backblaze is my backup to the cloud. And it runs from, it's supposed to run from 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock, I think it is. But anyway, what was I saying? If I take this over into Photoshop, they're both going to have 300 PPI. if I take the 12 megapixel camera and I wanted to make a 16 by 20 out of it, well, let's make it easy. These are 3 by 2. So let's say a 20 by 30 image out of this. There's 2 ways to do that. One is that you can go in and change. In fact, let's go into Photoshop and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's open this one into Photoshop. If I come in here in the image, go to image size, there's 2 ways that you can do this. I can come in here and say, let's make this a 30. So it's a 20 by 30. And what did it do? It lowered the resolution to 141,867. The reason it did that is because we're maintaining our pixel count. So what it's doing is it's spreading those pixels out to give you a bigger picture. I mean, this is, I'm sure you guys know most of this, but is that okay? That's the biggest question. Is that okay? That means the pixels are now spread twice as far apart as they were at 300. But if I come in here and I click on this resample and I change this to 300, what is going to happen is Photoshop has to resample and add in as many pixels as it already has. So in other words, it has to double the size of the pixels. So you're relying on Photoshop to interpolate and come up with the correct pixels to add into the image. Twice as many. So you only have half of those that you got out of camera. So now if you look at it up here, what do you have? You've got almost a 45 megapixel image, or more than a 40, you've got a 50 megapixel image. So let me see, if I take 9,000 times 49, 5989, yeah, it's 53.9 megapixel image. So you have gone from a 12 megapixel image to a 53, almost 54 megapixel image. And you've done that by having Photoshop, determine what those added pixels are. I just wanted you to know what's happening when you're doing this sort of thing. Does it do a good job? Well, that's up to you to say. You can also use Gigapixel, of course, from Topaz, that everybody thinks is wonderful, and I actually use it as well, and I think it's great. But you have to understand what's happening. The pixels that you got in camera, now your image that you have sized as 20 by 30, you only got half of those in the camera, and the other half came from Photoshop or AI Gigapixel. So I just want you to understand what is happening. So for me, let's get out of this and go back to where I was. Open those up again. Excuse me. So now, if I have this picture, this is the 45 megapixel picture. If I wanted to do a 20 by 30 of this, you've got the same kind of situation. How do I determine what PPI I need if I want to use all of my pixels? If I take 8256, which is the long side, and divide it by 30, divided by 30, you get 275.2. So I would change this to 275 like that. And now when I open it in Photoshop, the image size is going to be 20 by 30. So for printing, see, it's 20 by 30 because I put 275 in there. It's funny because in Camera Raw, it doesn't allow decimals, but in Photoshop it does. So I could get this exact if I wanted to, but I can't now for Camera Raw. So this is another way to determine what size your image needs to be. So if I were in Photoshop, or excuse me, in Camera Raw, I'm going to go back to Camera Raw. I'm going to go into Lightroom here in a minute to talk about it, but I want to talk just a few more minutes about this. One more time. Now it saves what I had in there before. So again, it says 275. So if I take this, I'm gonna put it back to 300. I typically bring everything in at 300 and do my changes over in Photoshop. But if I wanted to take this, let's say you wanted a wall mural and you wanted it to be 6 feet by 4 feet. What does it need to be? So 8256 by 6 feet, well, or 60 inches. Let's do 60 inches by 40 inches. That's what I meant. 5 feet by 3.5. So 60 inches. So divide that by 60 inches and you get 137.6. So if I would have to change the DPI to 137.6 to have the same thing. So let's just do that. We'll do 138 just for grins. And it's going to be off just a little bit, but you can change it over here. So that's the reason why I usually do it over here, because you can get it exact. See, now this is, if I make that 60, now you get, whoops, sorry, I hit enter by mistake. So now you get 60 by 40 at 137.6. So now you're saying, oh my goodness, that's less than half of the pixels per inch than I have at 300. Why would I ever want to do that? Well, think about, the thing you have to think about is how big this image is. This image is 5 foot by 3.5 feet. So it's pretty big. You really are not supposed to be like 10 inches away when you're looking at it. So I'm not going to get into the math necessarily, but viewing distance is supposed to be 1.5 times the diagonal of the image. So that's somewhere around 105 inches or something like that, which is like, what, 9 feet, 9.5 feet. So you really should be like 9.5 feet away from this. So next time you go to the gallery, be sure and take your tape measure with you so that you can be sure you're at the right viewing distance. But the point is that you don't need to be that close. So think of a billboard. You're looking at the billboard from, yards away, hundreds of yards away. It's the same kind of concept here. Do you really need the 300 pixels per inch for this? So if you did, and I came in here and did 300, let's see what effect we're going to have. I want you to look at this. This is 18,000 pixels by 12,000 pixels. Do you realize what kind of file that is? 3 times 12,000. That's a 216 megapixel file. So think of how big of a file that's going to be on your computer drive. So think about those things whenever you are thinking about printing an image. And this is primarily for printing. If you never do printing, then this may not even be important to you. But if you do printing, and you only print usually 5 by 7, 8 by 10, 16 by 20, I can tell you probably 300 PPI is plenty good, which is pretty standard. But I wanted you to know what's happening when you take something and change the size of it, especially when you crop something. I was going to do this later, but I'll do it right now. Let's say that I listened to some message boards, and for those of us that remember way back in the day, those were used to be like bulletin boards. And there's one out there where this guy writes a message and he says, now that we've got all these fancy cameras that can do all this wonderful thing, why do I need to have a telephoto lens? Why don't I just use my prime and then go in and Photoshop and crop it and zoom out and I'm good? And I'm going to show you what would happen. You probably already know, but let's come in here, and I'm going to do this freehand just for grins. So let's just come in here and we'll go in here like this. Let's pretend there's an eagle or some big bird on the top of this tree, and it's the shot of a lifetime, and you want to put it in your, on your wall above your fireplace or something. So try to use the rule of thirds here a little bit. So now this is it. You got this eagle or owl or whatever it is, hawk or something on top of this tree. So now you come in here and you go, that is the picture. So now let's look at the image size. And what have we got? we've got 2788 by 1915. So 2788 times 1915. And that's a 5 megapixel file. So now you spent $3,000 or $4,000 for a 45 megapixel camera and a couple $1,000s for this wonderful lens, and no telling what you spent to go to this place, and you come up with a 5 megapixel file. I mean, if that works for you, that's great. And sometimes it may, especially if you're going to show this on the internet, maybe that's all you need. Show that beautiful bird sitting up there that you shot with your big telephoto. So that is one, that's another issue with resolution that you have to think about. Now this is at 137. So even if I made this 300, oops, 300. Now I have still got the same pixels, but the biggest print I can make is a 9" by 6", and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's okay for you, especially if, now that's, of course, I'm doing this with the 45 megapixel image. If you had the 12 megapixel image that I was showing you a minute ago, you would have more like a 2" by 1" or something like that at this kind of resolution. But if you really needed a bigger image, then just lower the resolution a little bit. Of course, zoomed in like this, you probably would want the most resolution you could get. Okay, so I want to go over to Lightroom for just a second. I haven't used Lightroom for a couple of years now, so I'm kind of fumbling my way around here. But maybe some of you can help me a little bit. But I can't find anywhere in here where it tells me what my pixel count is or my pixels on each side of the image. So I've got a cropped, in this instance, I have a 20 by 30, so it's not cropped. But if I come in and I did an 8 by 10 like this and change this to 8 by 10, and come over here. I'm a little clunky at this because I don't really know what I'm doing. There we go. So now I've got an 8 by 10, but how many pixels do I have? I really don't know. Or if I crop it, if I came in and cropped it in here and then made an 8 by 10 up, how do I know how many pixels I have? I don't. So if you don't know what's happening, if you don't know what the pixels are, you really don't know how many, what kind of an image you have when you're done with it here when you print. But I do know over here that it tells me I've got 240 PPI. So if I have 8 by 10 and I have on the 10 is the long side, I just go 10 times 2, that's 2400, and then 8 by 240, it's 240, it's 1920 times 2400. I only have a 4.5 megapixel file because I've got the pixels spread out so much. One of the things that probably isn't real apparent is that if you want to use all your pixels and you're making a smaller image and you want to use all your pixels, you need to really up this image, this amount right here. For example, if I had 8256 pixels, which is the long side for my 45 megapixel camera, so 8256 divided by 10 is 825.6. I would need to change this to 825 in order to use all of my pixels. Now that's with a 3:2 format. So this is a 8 by 10. So I really don't know what the number on here actually is. But just food for thought. And maybe you guys know a little bit more about how to determine all of that stuff better than I do. All in all, you're probably, not going to change a thing. If you're happy with your printing and everything, then so be it. I mean, I'm not asking you to change anything. I just think it's interesting to understand how all of this works. And another thing too is the confusion between PPI and DPI. I get here comments and questions all the time in regard to DPI. instead of PPI. DPI has to do with your printer and the number of dots that your printer prints on the page. And in fact, I did some research on that a little bit, and 300 DPI, according to this one source, is equal to 118 PPI. So if I were to, like, for my seniors, when sometimes they ask me to give them a digital file or send it to the school for the yearbook or something like that, and I get what the requirements are. And I just got one the other day, and they want 300 DPI. So it's just I don't know, just a sore spot for me for some reason. But, just for you just to understand that PPI deals with what's on your screen, PPI deals with what's on your printer. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Any questions on any of this? I know this is probably a lot more than you really wanted to know, but I felt like that it would be worthwhile to discuss it again. I did a paper on this and put it in the learning and feedback, and I think 3 people read it because it was such a dry subject, and it was, but it's out there if you wanted to get further into it. Actually, I wrote the paper, I got an email from somebody, I can't remember who it was, where I'd bought ink from them or something, and there was a paper that they had written about doing this very thing, and they suggested that if you did an 8x10 for a 45 megapixel file, you should always do it at like 800 and something PPI. And so I started doing that a little bit whenever I was posting stuff to the internet and everything. It didn't tell any difference. So I think the smaller it is, it's not going to matter. The bigger it is, it becomes an issue that you need to think about. So any questions? Okay, I'll take that as a no. If anybody, hopefully everybody's not asleep. I was going to go into something else, but I think since I'm in Lightroom, there was, excuse me, there was a new update today. And I don't know if any of you are aware or if you looked into it or what, but I'm not a Lightroom user, but there's a couple of updates. Most of it is performance related. And to tell the truth, I didn't listen to it very closely, but there were some performance enhancements, something to do with the grid view and some other things that allows them to pop up a lot faster. But the one that, excuse me, the one that there are a couple in here that I did understand, and one of them is tethering. I don't know if any of you do any tethering, but for Nikon users, you now have live view for your tethering. So if you do any, and this mostly, when you're in studio or something like that, that you do tethering, and I think most of you guys don't do any studio shooting. But that's one of the new things. It's actually in beta, so it was kind of, Terry White was doing the video, and he actually had a little bit of a trouble with it because it's still in beta, but it's released. So you may want to think about it, especially if you have a client that you're working on it with. And I love live view tethering. That's why I don't use Lightroom. I use something else. Excuse me. So that was one of the things. The other thing was the profiles, our camera profiles. And they added a camera profile for Apple for the iPhone. So if you're using the new iPhone and you're shooting in Apple RAW format, they now have a profile out there that's much, much closer to what you've seen. So if you bring anything into Lightroom with the from your iPhone, especially the new iPhone, then they have a new profile out there for the phone. And there were a couple other things I don't really know much about, but most of the stuff was performance related. Okay. So I'm going to get out of Lightroom now before I mess something up. I did want to go over also the new things in Camera Raw as well, because Camera Raw had a new one as well. So let me close this. go back over here, open this up. My wife is having a fit in there over something that happened in March Madness, so please forgive her. So here are the new things in Camera Raw, and most of them I will not have anything to do with, but at least not now. I've said that before and then found myself thinking they were the next greatest thing. But down here at the bottom, you now have this filter so that you can filter based on certain criteria such as star rating or color, or show those that are marked for deletion or rejected or not rejected or whatever. I don't have anything here that is star rated or color labeled or anything, so I really can't show that to you, but that's one of the things. Now, I rarely have more than 7 or 8 images up here at the same time. The only exception to that's whenever I'm adjusting a from a basketball shoot or a softball from doing the banners and individual images. I'll bring all the individuals in here and I'll make the adjustments to all of them at the same time, particularly when I'm doing changing white balance to correct white balance. But I don't have any need to filter them or anything. I may, down the road, I may go, I only want to do this to the 5 stars or something like that. Now, then you have this one is how you sort them. You can sort them by capture date, file name, star rating, color label. And I can, if I did by capture date, it's going to reverse those because this is an old file back in 2009. This is a new one. So, but anyway, and then here's this, and this is, I think this one's actually been here. This turns off your film strip down here at the bottom. So it's really kind of neat that you can turn it off and you get a bigger picture here that you can work with and come back and turn it back on. So that's kind of cool. But the one everybody's talking about is right here. If you click the 3 little dots and go to enhance, you get this right here and you get this thing called super resolution. Now we've had enhance here for a while. And basically what it does is it attempts to create from AI learning how to improve your details and reduce artifacts. And so exactly what it says. I've never used it. It creates a DNG file and it just doubles my files. So I just assume do all my own editing, but it may really do some great stuff. So something at least to think about. But you have this super resolution. This is new. Excuse me. And what it does is it doubles the size of your file, doubles the pixel count in your file. So in this image, if I do this, it's a 45 megapixel file. So if I click to enhance, and it takes it a few minutes, especially with a file this big, it's going to bring it back, pop it up right here, and we'll see down here that it's going to be a much bigger file. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. It didn't take real long this afternoon. It took about a minute, I think. There we go. So now we have this is a DNG file. You can see up here at the top, it says enhanced DNG. And if you look down here, it's a 182 megapixel file. So it did more than double the size. I mean, it's huge. So, and of course, I need to change this from 138 before I forget back to 300. I'll be doing all kinds of funky things with pictures. So anyway, that is one of the other big things that you get with this. Now, one of the things that I will do, if you come over here and click anywhere, I usually will do it down here, right click, you have the edit panels to show. You've had this in Lightroom forever, but now we have the ability to come over here and move things around and turn things off. So I rarely use the color and black and white mixer, so I got it turned off. I rarely do the effects, so I got that turned off. And I usually have detail, I think it's down here, so I moved it up here to 3rd place because detail is sharpening, and that's where I do that almost every image. So that's one of the other things, one of the other new things that is out here in Camera Raw. And the last thing is the same thing that we talked about over in Lightroom, and that is that in your camera profile, they have added, and I haven't seen it over here, but it's in here somewhere. If you have a Apple RAW file from their phone, from the iPhone, you can come in here and use that particular profile to get a more a color rendering and everything more in line with what you saw when you took the image, more in line with what's on the phone itself. So those are the new things. Any questions on any of this? I know you guys are not typically raw users, but some pretty cool stuff happening here.
I do, Bob.
Sure.
You mentioned Lightroom tethering. I avoid Lightroom like plague, but I've not found a tethering software that works. In fact, one I tried was destructive to my system. Can you use Lightroom to tether and nothing else?
Sure.
Cool.
The thing, and I say that, what you do is you have to tell it, let's go back, I already closed it, but we can open it up again.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, do you have to have them already, the images already cataloged, or
No.
or do you have to catalog them after you shoot?
No.
Okay, so it can be a standalone tether.
Yes, and it brings them in and adds your preset to it and puts it in your catalog.
I don't want a catalog.
Well, it imports them and everything. Now I've been using it for tethering alone, but I bring it in and it adds into the catalog, but then I go in and move it out and put it wherever I want and do whatever I want to do with it.
Okay, I'll link with it and see what happens. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Lightroom for me has been pretty much hit and miss for tethering, and it gets kind of frustrating when you're in front of a client and it works and then all of a sudden it just quits and you're sitting there wondering how to get it going again, because the kids, whenever I'm shooting for these posters and banners, they love to see what has happened when they look on the laptop and see it, and I like to see it so that I know that I'm getting what I want. And then if it suddenly just goes blank, then I lose a little bit of that excitement about the images. So, but it's been better lately, and I don't know, I switched to since I've had the D850, it's done better. And it may be just the technology, it may be that Lightroom's getting better, and it may just be that I'm doing it right for some reason. But I bought Smart Shooter 4, which is owned by Tether Tools. And since I'm doing tethering with them, Smart Shooter 4 is really cool. It always connects, and it's very reliable, but it's only compatible with Nikon, Sony, and Canon. It's not compatible with anybody else. So it's it's not great for everybody. It's not available for everybody, but it's and it's like $75, something like that. The pro version is $150 or something like that. So anyway, it's another option. And there are a lot of other tethering tools out there that you can buy that are third-party tools. It's, people have available for you. There's one that's free, but I've never gotten it to work, and then that's why it's free, I guess. And then there's some others that are anywhere from $35 to $75 that I didn't want to go with. I also have Nikon, what's it called, Control Pro, which is really nice too. But it's more for controlling your camera. But it also, you can view it through Nikon NI or whatever that's called, so you can have them together, and it's kind of, anyway, getting off subject a little bit, but tethering is great for me. But if you're a landscape only shooter, then sometimes it's, you have to have your laptop, whatever, and it's not really conducive to your style probably if you're out and about, especially in a place like this, out in equipment or something like that. Okay. Whoops. I want to move on. And I want to talk about masking. And I want to talk about masking because in the last few camera club meetings, whenever the presenter said, "I assume you know about masking," I've heard this, no, I don't understand masking. So we did talk about masking, and we have used masking all along. And apparently I haven't done a very good job. So I want to go back to the basics. And then anytime, and I use masking on like 99% of my images, because chances are whenever you want to do an adjustment, you don't want to do it on every part of the image. You just want to do that adjustment in certain places, kind of like your adjustment brush. But in Photoshop, you can use mask as one of the most powerful tools that there is. I think probably what you were meaning when you said no was, I understand what a mask is, but I just have trouble understanding how to create the mask the way I need it in order to get what I want. And so we're going to talk about from the very beginning here, very basic masks. And as we get into other aspects down the road, we will try to, or I will try to make sure that we talk very basically about masks and how I am creating these masks. And we'll go through it probably over and over again, because it's just one of the things. It's kind of like layers. Layers is the basic part of Photoshop, and masking is another basic thing in Photoshop that you really, really need to understand when you're doing Photoshop. So I'm going to bring in an image. And this is one of my seniors. Let's see, which one was I doing? I don't even see it now. Oh, it's right here. And this is, oh shoot, that's a TIFF file. Well, it's going to take it a few minutes to load. This is one of the ways that I've started liking bringing back, you know, whenever I talked about the interface with Photoshop back a couple years ago, I was talking about this particular interface. And I think I said that I really don't use it. It's kind of nice for folks that are new to Photoshop and blah, 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 blah. Well, I've found that I like the way that it organizes recent files. So when I have recent files, I can either go to File, Open Recent, or I can just click this little house up here and it brings me back here and I get a thumbnail view and I can open them that way. And to me, that's a little bit easier because I don't always remember the name of the file that I'm working with. So anyway, it also has these tutorials you can browse. It's a pretty neat little interface, and I'm getting, this is one of those, like I said a minute ago, that I had no use for it before, but the more I look at it, the more I work with it, the more I really like it. So you may want to think about giving it a shot. This has gone faster than I thought. I really thought the resolution thing was going to last for like an hour, but I tried to cut it really short because I think you guys understand pretty much what about resolution. I just wanted to point out a few things that I thought were important to just know. They're not important that you use all the time, but just important to know. So, okay, here we go. This is one of my seniors that I shot last year. And I'm going to flatten this image so that I don't mess up anything, and it's a little easier to work with. Okay, so when you think about a mask, now you've been wearing masks for almost a year now, so you think about a mask, you are hiding something. And what you're hiding with your mask you're wearing nowadays is you're hiding the germs of either getting in or out. But I like to think of it more like a bank robber goes in to rob a bank. He's hiding his face. That's a mask. It's what we're going to do here. We're going to come in here to this image and we're going to create a mask of her face. And just so you know, a mask has to be used in regard to something else. It's just like a blending option. You can't blend if there's nothing to blend with it. In a mask, there's nothing to mask if there's nothing that you're using. So in other words, you can't mask nothing. So you have to either mask like this image or an adjustment layer or a filter or something like that you've done, that you've applied to the image. So we're going to just pick something here, and I'll just use levels. And levels and all of these adjustment layers automatically create a mask for you. Now this mask is not hiding anything. This is like the bank robber that comes in without his mask on. So in this case, we're going to go add that mask to her. And I'm going to give you some tips here. So if you want to write these down, they're kind of cool, I think, especially if you are not, well, especially if you're wanting to get some tricks of the trade. Okay, so what we do, to hide, you paint black on the mask. And it's the old, you've probably heard this 100 times, you know, black conceals, white reveals. Well, it's the same thing here. We're going to paint black over her face. The trick or the tip is if you press the backslash key, which is the key that's right above your return key, right next to your right bracket key, just hit it once, and maybe give me a big size brush. Now, when you paint, oh, it switched down here on me from white to black. So there you go back. Now, when you paint, it's going to paint over it with a color, and you have an option of changing this color, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But basically, this is a nice way when you're doing a mask to know exactly what you've got masked while you're doing it. It's kind of like what you have over in Lightroom when you're creating your mask over there. Okay, or when you're using your adjustment brush and you're painting in, you know exactly what you're painting in. Okay, so I'm not being real careful here. I guess if I were doing this for real, I'd be a lot more careful, of course. But I just want to get her face in here, and we'll just go ahead and get her eyebrows too. What the heck? Okay, so that helps you understand what you have painted. Now, if I hit the backslash key again, it goes away. If you look over here on the mask, you can see what you have. If another tip here, you probably heard this one, but if you press the Option or the Alt key on the PC and click, then you see the mask, and you go, oh, I missed just a little bit right here. You can go ahead and paint it in like that. Okay. Excuse me. Then if you press the Option or Alt key and click on there again, it brings you back. So that gives you a good way so you can see your mask that you actually have done. Now, what we've said is that we are going to apply a levels adjustment to this image, but we're hiding her face. Okay, so we have a mask that is hiding her face. So if we click on here and we go up to our levels, and let's push this over this way, we can push black down this way, and look at what it's doing. Everything is being affected except the mask on her face. So now it looks like she's holding a mask up there with her hand. Okay, so that is the only thing that has not been affected. Everything else has been affected, but the mask has kept the face from being affected by this levels adjustment. Now here's another shortcut, or another tip, is if you press the Shift key and click on the mask, it hides the mask. So now you can see that everything has been darkened because she doesn't have a mask on anymore. If I hold the Shift key down and click on it again, you can see now she does have the mask and her face has not been affected by this change. So this is all there is to a mask in its simplicity. The hard part is creating that mask the way you want it. Okay, we're going to do one more example of the mask just so you get it. And I think you kind of get it. I just want to make sure. I'm going to throw this away. I don't know why I'm doing that. Okay, so there is another way to do the same thing. We're going to click. We're going to do a curves this time. And I want to affect nothing on here at all except her eyes. Okay, you can see that and what I'm going to do that is to have a mask over everything except her eyes, because her eyes is the only thing I want affected on here. So how do you do that? You need to paint this entire thing with black first, and then you're going to just reveal her eyes. So how do you paint this with black? There's about 5 different ways to do that. You can get your black brush out and just paint black all over it until this is totally black. You can come over here to edit and click fill and use the fill dialog box here to fill with black down here. You can, and I think there's a way, but I can't find it on the menu up here to say invert the layer. And there's probably a way over here as well to invert the layer. But what we're going to do is, it's actually not the layer you want to invert, it's the mask you want to invert. The shortcut for that is Command I or Control I, and it just does that. Now, sometimes I do it that way, and sometimes I use the fill command, which is edit and fill. And the shortcut for that is just Shift Delete or Shift Backspace, takes you to the fill. And I just say black and fill it like that. And I can also do white. There's one more shortcut I forgot to tell you, and that is if you do Command or Control Delete, it fills it with the background color, and Alt Delete or Backspace, and it fills it with the foreground color. So I can fill it with white like that and black like that. So those are several different ways you can do the same thing. The point is just to fill it with black. And if the only way you can remember is just getting a brush and painting black, then that's good enough, because you can make a real big brush and just paint. But the idea is that it's now black, so that anything you do over here, you can't see anything. So I'm doing some real wonky stuff here, and you can't see it at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in here to her eyes, and we're at like a little over 200% here. And again, I'm going to hit the backspace key, and look at what happens. Everything is hidden, then it fills everything with red. So now what you're going to do is paint away that red by painting white. So I'm going to come in here with my brush. Oh, I need to be on the mask. And I'm going to paint around her iris. Oops, it switched it back to black. You have to be careful. So, when you're working with this backslash thing, sometimes it changes your palette as to, from foreground to background or background to foreground. So, okay, so there's her eyes. And all I did was I just revealed that part of the image. So now I can hit the backslash key again. Everything's gone. And now I can come over here to the curves, and I can grab this and I can push it up. Now I've already messed with her eyes on this image, so they're already pretty bright. You can bring it down here. Maybe you want them darker. You can bring it down here and darken them. And you can see, again, I'm going to do a Alt or Option, click over here, and it shows that I just did the eyes like that. I can also do the Shift, turn it off, turn it on. Oh, turning it off also gets rid of the, also gets rid of the concealing of everything. So if I turn this off, it's actually going to put the entire image with the curves layer on it. So you can't really see what I wanted to see. If you just look at the eyes, though, you can see where I made them a little bit darker. But you can even get a little more creative here. You come in here RGB, and maybe you want to add a little bit of red to her eyes. You can push that up and give her a little bit of redness in her eyes. You can go put a little bit of blue in her eyes, and you wind up getting a little bit of purple in there that matches her sweater. Kind of cool, huh? People really have eyes like that, don't they? So masking is that simple. It's really, I didn't do anything special. I didn't go create a luminosity mask. I didn't do anything, with select and mask, or do anything with color range or anything like that. I just did, this is just simple stuff going in. And this is what I do most of the time when I do masking, is I'm using my brush to paint in and paint out things. So any question about masking? We will get further in. I want you to notice here a couple of things. See these TK panels over here? The camera meeting we had with Anita got me interested, especially when she talked about creating masks from colors, and got me interested enough to where I went out and bought that. Pretty decent price for something that's pretty simple. And we'll be getting into that at some point too, because that's some pretty powerful stuff. In fact, I think somewhere down the road, we'll compare TK7 with the Greg Benz actions that we were running earlier last year to get a luminosity mask. So, okay, no questions. Let me get back here, back to the beginning and close this. All right, now I want to talk about HDR and exposure blending. HDR, in my opinion, has gotten a bad rap of the last, I don't know, 10 years or whatever, because most people associate HDR with these strong colors and color contrast and deep, I don't know, deep edge contrast type stuff. And yeah, that's kind of it too. But HDR was designed for expanding your dynamic range so that you can have an image that includes the shadows, the highlights, and the midtones. And if, you know, especially in our group where we go out in the middle of the day when we have strong sun and strong shadows, you're going to, I've almost always run into situations where I have had a blown out sky or, you know, nothing in the shadows because I've exposed for the sky or something of that nature. So I wanted to kind of go through a comparison of exposure blending with HDR. So I'm going to bring in a couple of images here, and let's see, I think it's these two images, or is it these two images? This is in Fate from our venture out the other day. I'm going to open these in Camera Raw. And this is just a 2-image combination. Typically what you'll do is more like a 3 to 5 images. And in reality, you know, especially if you have a 45 megapixel camera, you probably don't need more than 3 images. We're going to take these 2 images and try to put them together in HDR. And you have this exact same capability over in Lightroom. And, you know, again, what I've done here, what I'm trying to do here is have this nice blue sky in the background with all this green stuff in the background, and have a nice image of the stairway as well. You know, this is not a great picture, but I shot this specifically to show you this. And this is interesting because this must not be the 2 images that I actually did when I was practicing, because the stairs didn't line up in the other image. Now this one, these are handheld, by the way. And it actually did a pretty decent job. I told it to align the images and apply auto settings. So we're going to merge these together, and it creates an HDR DNG image for you. So I'm just going to say save, and it will open this up as the HDR image. Now, what you have here, a little bit of a delay here. This a little smaller. There we go. So what you have here is it has made an attempt over here to tone your image for you, which is great because it typically does a really good job. Now, if you look, this image is better than either one of these individually, obviously, because this one you can't even see the stairs, and this one you have no sky. So it brings them both together. Now, one thing you might notice is that it got rid of this edge here of this building, which we had in both of these images, and that's part of the aligning the images. It had to remove that in order to get them to align perfectly. But the thing I really want to show you on this HDR stuff is I want you to look at this exposure now. Typically you have plus and minus 5 stops. But if you look at and you'll never need this necessarily, but just to show you, you actually have 10 stops that you can go whenever you bring these two together. So you have much more flexibility whenever you bring this together as an HDR. Now, it doesn't help you much here, but it can certainly help you if you come over here and do a adjustment brush adjustments. You have more latitude, more ability to do some things. But I love these kind of things because it's a great way to bring the images, get all of your highlights and all your shadows and your midtones, which you can see in this image. It's not a great image, but I did it again just to show this to you. So I'm going to show you a different one. Excuse me. It's kind of interesting because the one I did before was not like that. So it may have been, we'll just do two more. Now these are definitely not going to line up. No, we won't do those. What I'm going to do now is go to a different set. And let's see if I can find, where was that? That was Sulphur Springs, I believe. If I could type, that'd be nice. Okay. Okay, let's see. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so here's another set of images, exactly the same issue. You've got this one I exposed for the shadows, this one I exposed for midtones, and this one for the sky, for the highlights. So we're going to take these three, and we're going to open Camera Raw. Again, not a great image, but that's not the point. I shot this again specifically to show you this. And if I highlight all three of those and go here and say merge to HDR, it actually does just a fantastic job here of putting all this stuff together and giving you the option to have a great image. I don't know if you have dealt with HDR very much. Some of you probably could show me a few things. But again, we have nice stuff in the grass here. You can see this in the shadows. You got a nice blue sky. So I'm just going to say merge. And actually, I've done this twice before, so I'm going to make this say 3. Now, the good thing about this is the things you can do after the fact. Again, let's see. So if you want to come in here and bring out these and come in here and add a little bit of darkness and stuff to the foreground, I mean, you've got, everything is really already good, but I wanted to just open this up. And this is pretty good. This is with my Z7 II, and you got some really good detail in here. And again, handheld, which really kind of shocked me. I didn't think I could do it. But I'm going to come in here and we're going to use the adjustment brush to come in here and see if we can just kind of bring out some of these shadows, like right there.
Bob, Susan has a question on the chat.
Okay.
She says, how are you going from bridge, merge to camera roll?
I'm opening them from bridge and they come over to camera raw automatically. And then whenever I highlight these three, and then I click on these 3 little buttons and it says merge to HDR, and I just select that. I'll do another one here in just a minute, and I'll go through it a little bit slower. Sorry about that. So I'm going to open this up, and thank you for pointing that out, by the way, Robin. I appreciate it. We're going to bring the shadows up over there, and you can see how it brings out some of the details. And I can also just push the exposure, maybe just a touch. And now you have a little bit of information from over here. Now you could do the same thing in some of these other areas, and I may want to actually lighten the shadows within here quite a bit. So I'm going to come in here and create another point, and I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to reset this, and I'm just going to come in here and just kind of loosely, just want to lighten those shadows just a little bit. So bring the shadows up just a little bit to lighten that up. So it gives it a little bit more dimension, or a little bit more visual details. Then I want to come in and do some things to this grass. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to reset this again one more time. Whoops. I messed that up because I went to 0 before I turned this off, before I created a new one. There we go. Now I'm back. So I need to create a new one. It was, so I had that one selected, and I reset this, and so it reset what I had done. So don't want to do that. So now I've got a new one, and we're just going to kind of paint again loosely. I'm not doing this as if, you know, if I were making a wall portrait of this or something, I would be much more careful. I'm just kind of showing you what I would do here. Somebody wanted to see how I do some editing. This is kind of part of it. So if I turn off the mask, and then I come in here and I can do all kinds of things. I'm going to add a little bit more warmth to the grass there. See what that does. And then maybe bring the highlights down a little bit. It's going to make it a little dull when I do that. But then I'm going to add some clarity, which is going to add some more detail. And maybe that's it. So now I've done this. Now I'll go back over and I'll do more global adjustments over here, and I'm going to add a little bit of texture. I always add a little texture to these landscapes, and I'm going to add quite a bit of clarity. Now, typically what I should do is go in and do my sharpening first. And since I didn't do that, I'm going to go ahead. This is something I learned from Moose Peterson here, and I just do it to all of them. Come in here, and whatever I want to sharpen, I make sure it's in white, which is just about everything except the sky. And then I just make it 120. It really adds a lot of pop to it. So now you've got this image in here. I don't know how it looks on your end, but it looks pretty good on this end. So again, not a great picture, but I just wanted to show you how you can take an HDR process and then process the file a little bit. And you could wind up getting where you don't have to worry about this, so that I can get all of that. And then you don't have to worry about those shadows coming in later and trying to darken the sky and then darken the grass and everything. Or this, where you have the sky the way you want it, but you need to lighten this up because you can't see anything. So you add them all together and you get the best of all of that. There you go. Okay. Any questions about that?
Yes.
Okay.
I would, if I had done all that, I would have done it inside Photoshop. I would just process the raw images, save them, and then gone to Photoshop, merged them in, and done a similar thing. And the question is there an advantage to doing it in in ACR? And the reason I ask that is because I tend to shy away from using ACR for a lot of stuff, because you tend to be married to it once it's done.
Well, being married to it, I don't know, because it's totally non-destructive, and that's the whole point of doing most of your stuff over in Camera Raw, which is what I've always suggested. I don't know that there's a big advantage other than that. If you're comfortable doing it over in Photoshop the exact same way, then do it over in Photoshop.
Well, I would do it non-destructive in Photoshop. So I guess that's,
okay.
Yeah, okay, got it.
You don't have the clarity slider over there though, and the texture slider, which I find really help out a lot.
Yeah, but you got the ACR filter.
Yeah, you do. You could bring that in. That's true.
And that probably
Um,
would. Yeah. Anyhow,
yeah.
well, thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're more comfortable in Photoshop, by all means, do it over there. I mean, I'm just showing options.
Mhm.
Um, but I typically will do most of it here. If I'm doing something creative, it's when I work in Photoshop. When I'm working
Mhm.
on editing an image like this, I will typically do everything I can over here. Now, what we just saw with that portrait of that senior, most of that I do in Photoshop just because I'm more comfortable with adjusting the skin over there, more comfortable with doing a lot of things over there. So if I'm doing a landscape, I'll do most of it here, but if I'm doing a portrait, I'll do most of it in Photoshop. That's just me. I'm more comfortable. Now, there's also other things, other reasons to be in Photoshop, and I hate the what you call it filter. I call it the Band-Aid filter over there. It's the healing brush. I hate the healing brush thing that's over here in Camera Raw and in Lightroom. When I was using Lightroom, I hated it over there too. The one in Photoshop is so much more powerful and easier to use. So that's one thing I will not do in Camera Raw is try to clone something or erase something. And there's probably some other things. The curves over here I don't like. I know it's just the same thing, but I'm used to the curves over there. Um, so, I mean, there are certain things that I will not do here. It's all in what you're comfortable with. Any other questions? All right, well, let's do this. Do I want to use this one? I can use this one. This is going to be a little bit more difficult. I'm going to show you how to do exposure blending to accomplish hopefully close to the same thing instead of doing HDR. I like to do HDR because it comes in all blended together, and all you have to do is make your adjustments. It gives you a much wider dynamic range that you can work with. Here you have to actually put the files together yourself. And in some cases, like in this one where I did hand holding, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. You saw over in Camera Raw when you did HDR, it aligned them really, really well. But basically what you need to do is put all of these in one file. And you can do that through file, scripts, load files into stack, but it won't do it over here because unless, I should say, add open files, they have to be saved before you can merge them together. So they have to be a saved file. Right now, they are not a TIFF or a PSD or anything. They're still a raw file, and you can't work on a raw file in Photoshop. So you have to save it first in order for the program to work with it. Now, you don't have to do that when you're actually adding adjustments to it. Once you're done with it, you can save it as a TIFF or a PSD or whatever. But if it's the same way when you're doing any kind of a batch file or anything that I have found anyway, it has to be saved first. So for me, it's easier for me to just come in here and add them together. All you have to do is drag and drop. So you can go either way to load your files. This is the one that's up, so I'm just going to load these others into this one. So I'm going to press on the Shift key. You have to have your Move key, Move tool over here in your toolbar. Press Shift and then just drag this over here like this. And then when it comes up, then you have to drag it back down. And the reason you press your Shift key is because it will load it directly the same way it's loaded into this image. So in other words, if you don't press your Shift key and you let go up here, it will have your file way up here. And so it centers your file for you. So now I'm going to take this one and we're going to do the same thing. Press the Shift key, grab this and move it over here, and then bring it back down, and then it loads that on there. Now these are not lined up real well. So there's another thing that's in here, and this is align layers. Well, it's grayed out. Why is it grayed out? Because it can't do it with smart objects. Okay, another roadblock. But if you really want to keep these smart objects, all you have to do is just copy them. And there's ways that you can copy them. So we're just going to do a Command J. And now we have them up here. Now I'm going to rasterize them. and now you have them rasterized. You still maintain your ability here. But once you work on these, I mean, you really lost the link. So this is kind of an iffy reason to keep these down here, because you're going to have them. If you need the raw file again, you can always go reopen it. Excuse me. But I find myself trying to be cautious. And then I can turn these off. Now I can take these three and I can say edit, auto align layers, and it will try to line them up for you, which is important if you're hand holding, which I was. Okay, so you have a little bit of an alignment here. You'll notice over here, a little bit at the top and a little bit on the right side and a little bit at the bottom, almost all the way around. So typically what you'll want to do is come in and crop it to get rid of that. So come in here and I'll do a little bit of a crop. Bring this in here, just inside that. And by the way I'm doing it is I'm blending the entire images together. If you really just wanted to blend in a certain piece of one, you know, maybe you just bring in part of that image, or maybe, you know, to me, it's easier just to come in and line them up. Then you can come in here and begin to put your mask on them. We're masking again. There's that word, masking. So what we're going to do is we have to determine what part of which image we want where, if that makes sense. So I've got exposed for the shadows. I've got this one that is actually, yeah, this one is exposed for the shadows. This one is your midtones. And this one is your shadows, excuse me, your sky, your highlights. Okay, so basically, and I have a little bit of that last one that's off too. So I'm probably going to crop it again once I get them all together. And you'll see that actually I can see it right here because that's not lined up right. So I'm going to crop off just a little bit more of this edge right here. Come on. Okay, so I'll pull that in just a little bit more to crop it off. Okay. So I'm going to show you a quick down and dirty approach. I probably, you know, would take a lot more. You know what? I'm running out of memory here. It's about to blow up. One of the things I really love is having this little application up here. I only have 5.62 gigabytes, so I'm going to click on that and I'm going to have it to free some memory for me. And it's going to keep this from probably crashing here in a few minutes. While that's doing that, you know, there's different approaches, and I may decide that, you know, I just want to bring in and just do the top part here first. And I would just use 2 images. And I would just come in here and line it up and just try to get some of this information back at the top, and then come in here and say, okay, I want the bottom one for this and whatever, and then come in here and just work strictly on that. But I like to put them all together. And because it gives me a little bit of, I don't know, completeness, I guess. But what's going to happen is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, what do I want to show from the image below? And basically I want to show everything except this real, you know, down here that's normally in the shadows, where I'm actually, the reason I exposed this way was to get all of this. So I want to make sure that I get all of that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this. Okay. I see I got 31 gigabytes now. So, okay, so I'm going to come in here with a brush, pretty good size brush, and I'm doing this quickly, so it's going to be a little bit different than if I were really doing it again for a wall portrait or something like that. So I'm just coming in here and I'm painting away from this image to show the image below. Okay. So I just want this part. Now you could get real detailed in here and come in here and do the same thing right here and make sure that that's, and I'm doing real sloppy there, but bring that back in. Then you come in here, do the same thing down below. Bring this in like this, again, being real sloppy here, but this is where a luminosity mask or something from a TK7 panel would be great, because you'd be able to get these weeds that are floating up here, which I'm not able to get with just using the brush. I would use something like that. And you've got a little bit of highlights over here that you may want to bring down. Again, that's looking terrible because I'm being sloppy. If I bring this back, yeah, shoot, I should just leave that alone, I guess. Okay, now I want to bring this deep blue sky in, and maybe even this grass, maybe, bring in some more. So what do? I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it down here so that I can bring it in from this lower layer here. So I'm just going to bring this and copy it down. And now see what happens is I'm seeing from the lower layer, but I'm seeing too much because it's really dark. Now you can see here too that I still missed on the crop. So maybe it's better to just kind of wait till the end. But basically what I can do to make this a little bit lighter, it's kind of dark, is I can come in here, and this is a little bit of advanced masking, I guess, but what you can do, and you know what, I need to take and probably get this, I missed this little area here. Whoops, wrong way. And just kind of bring that in here too. Do it to both of them. So you see, oh, that's way too dark. Because that's going to be showing how dark it is down here. It's really dark in those shadows. So there are certain parts, like this right here is too dark too. So I would want to come into this mask and probably take away just a little bit of that, and this right here too. So you don't have to do your mask at 100%. Maybe you just want to take away a little bit of the black or the white. So I'm going to bring back some of this, and I'm going to do it by painting white, and I'm going to do it like 20% at a time. And let's just see what happens now. It's on both of these, so I'm going to have to probably do it on both of these. So you can see how tedious this is compared to working with HDR. You have to really just kind of know what you're trying to accomplish here. Now you've got this dark area down here, and I'm doing just 20% at a time. We'll come back up here and do it up here as well. So again, a mask from TK7 or luminosity mask in some way would help you be able to paint this stuff away a lot better. So again, I need to probably hit this right in here with black to get rid of some of this brightness here, and then do it down here as well. So if I were using a mask from TK7 or something, that would already be mask off, and I would just be painting over it. And so that's obviously the better way. And I had some black up here too, so I want to take this and probably paint white in here. It's too dark. So time-consuming thing, and it's not as accurate. It's not going to be as accurate as the other one. We're going to come up here, and I'm just going to take about 10% off right there. It's kind of grungy looking. And then you would come in here and do some other stuff. So basically this is how you are exposure blending these three so that you get, oh, the sky's a little dark. I was going to take that off. So we're going to come in here to this, and I'm going to go with the big brush and paint white at, so I've got it at 10%. That looks pretty good. So just kind of take some of that. It's a little bit too dark, and even maybe one more time. So that looks pretty good. So then you could come in here and again do some of the stuff that I did over there, assuming that you're happy with this. Now I'm not happy with it, but because I would spend more time taking care of this little light area here and some of these weeds and everything. But if, say, you're happy with it, then you could come in here and begin to do your other things with your, like Robin, you were talking about using the clarity from the camera raw filter. You could come in here and do that and actually do some sharpening, I guess. Oh, sharpening is 0. Huh. and then come in here, do the same thing, and then come up here in the basic, add a little texture, add a little clarity, and you got a pretty decent looking image. And especially if you had all of these little weeds taken care of here and these highlights taken care of here. And of course, I left some of that dark mess area there. So not a bad image for a 10-minute exposure blend. Does that make sense to everybody about what I did? Did I lose you? Is everybody awake?
Seems like the HDR is a lot simpler.
It is a lot simpler. I mean, you watched John do his stuff a couple months ago, and he did an exposure blend, and he just did part of the image. I think it was the sky and a little bit of the horizon, and I think there was some water or something that he blended in. And that's, you know, that's a lot of times, I guess, all you need to do. It just depends on what your, you know, what kind of images you have to start with.
Yeah.
And with something like that, if you have a sky and a horizon or something, it doesn't necessarily have to line up real well. I mean, with exposure blending, sometimes you can shoot one day and come back next week and shoot it again, as long as you're reasonably in the same position, and then blend the sky in or blend the horizon in with that first image, and you're okay. This is a much more detailed one right here, but you can see that it did a pretty dang good job of bringing in this detail back here.
Yeah.
Where you didn't have anything close to that before. So, yeah, I do this, and I used to do it more than I've done it recently, but it's a great way to get an image where you are, again, you know, expanding the dynamic range so that you can bring out all those shadows. You actually, instead of using a shadow slider or curves or something like that, where you're introducing the possibility of noise or color shifts or something like that, you're actually using what you captured in your camera. And it's just so much more robust, so much clearer, so much sharper, and that sort of thing. And I'm really kind of shocked that it worked this well for handheld. And this is a camera I was just learning how to use. So not too bad. And I know that it has bracketing, but I didn't know how to use it. So I was doing it manually. So here I am, I shoot, and then I was just clicking the shutter speed to slow it down or speed it up, and shooting again, and shot 3 images. And it was amazing that they came out this clear. So any other questions about that? So did the masking thing help at all? No?
Yeah, I think every time you go over it a little more, it, you know, it becomes a little more clear each time, and you pick up. I kind of understand it now. You know, at first I was just like, I just don't get this. Now I do understand what the masking does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it became real important over here because, you know, I'm wanting to show only a certain part. So I wanted to show just this part in here where there was, you know, where it brought out the detail for the midtones. And in order to do that, I have to hide everything else.
Yeah.
And then the same thing here. I want to hide everything else and show just a little bit more of this other layer, this bottom layer. So masking is just, I mean, and I did it totally with the brush. Now, you know, again, if I were doing it for a wall portrait or something, I would probably use a luminosity mask or something so that I could be sure and get these weeds here that are popping up here that I didn't get covered in other areas. But hopefully that helped. So Anybody have any suggestions for our next meeting? Robin, you usually have some kind of suggestion.
Well, okay. You have done luminosity masks over and
Okay.
over, and I'm a tabula rasa on that. And yeah, Anita did that presentation, I guess it was last month, on the TK panel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are so disposed to do that
Okay.
once again, I'd be okay with it, because
Okay.
I'm still no way.
Also, Susan had some more questions, I think.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
In the chat.
okay. Yeah. Let's see what we have here. Well, I show another sharpen.
Which I
So
think
right now,
was before you actually did it again, but
oh,
she could answer if you did it or not. I think you did, but
okay. Well, it's just, I learned this from Moose Peterson, like I said. And I did it on there was a video. I didn't learn it from him directly, but it was on a video about how to get sharper images. And this is one of the things that he suggested. And if we go back to camera raw filter, I didn't create a smart object for that, so it's going to be blank again. Basically what he does is he goes in, and this is on, I think he does the same thing on almost all of his images, and I've started doing it on all of my images. But basically you go into sharpen and you put it at 80, so it defaults to 80. And then I use the masking. If you press your Alt or Option key and move this to the right, you can, anything that's white is what's going to be sharpened. So you just move it as far as you need it so that you can sharpen only what you want to sharpen, and then increase it to 120. And it really adds some pop to your image. That's probably over sharpening because I've already done it. But then on top of that, like to add a little bit of texture, maybe up to 5 or 7, and then a lot of clarity, because I really like clarity, maybe around 25, especially if I'm working on, I mean, only on a landscape. I wouldn't do it on a portrait, but only on a landscape. Now this is overdone because I've already done it, but you can see, look at how sharp that is and how much detail you can see in there. And I hope you can see this over the Zoom. But that's the way that I sharpen pre-sharpening. Then when I get ready to print, I'm going to cancel this. When I get ready to print, I do another sharpening with Topaz Sharpen. And I come in here and go to Topaz Labs and do Sharpen AI. And it's really, let's see, hopefully if there's a new version, it'll come up and say that there's a new version, but I can get by it. So you can come in here and there's different kinds of sharpen. You've got this stabilize, which is the same way as shake reduction over in Photoshop. And then you have focus. So if you have a focus issue, it tries to fix that. I haven't found it to ever really do very good at that, but it does okay. But then I sharpen here and I do a little bit of sharpness, and you can do noise suppression and some other things. But anyway, this is what I do before I print, because typically when I'm putting stuff on top of it, it's going to reduce the sharpening a little bit, whenever I do it, putting effects on it. If I don't do anything to it over here, then I will not do any output sharpening. So if I don't do any adjustments over here, which is very rare, and take it straight out of camera raw, I probably won't do any more sharpening. Let's see. Do I ever use a selection to start a mask and then use your brush? Absolutely. And that's what let's say that I wanted to do something with this weed. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but you can do a select subject, or actually it's over here what I wanted to do. This is your object selection tool. And I can come in here and see if it's going to select. It may do me a selection around this one if I'm lucky. kind of, but I mean, you could do something like that, and then, or you could do the luminosity mask like we were talking about. But now that I have that, I could create a curves adjustment based on that little bitty selection, and then come in here and just do a little bit of darkening right there to try to get that darkened down a little bit. And I could even come in and, let's see, the opposite of blue is yellow. So I could bring down, add some yellow in here. It's really more of a greenish yellow. But anyway, you could do something like that as well. And yeah, I do that all the time. I also would come in here, maybe if I wanted to do this post here, I could do a lasso, polygon lasso tool, and come in here and select, say from here, and go straight down to like in here, and then up like this. And I don't know where that beginning was, but it's over in here somewhere right there. So now I have that selection. I could also do a levels adjustment, and I could bring that down a little bit, the midtones, and that's really high contrast. So I would probably not do it that way, but you get the point. I can make a selection like that and make an adjustment. I may want to do a clone from this down to here. Maybe that's a better way to go, so that I keep my selection and come in here on this layer and then do a clone. Oops. Over here like this. If I can find my cursor, there we go. Something like that. And then come down here and just clone in here. And it's just going to get whatever's inside that area. And I can do it. Oops. I'm being real sloppy with it, but you get the idea. And that may be a better way to do it. You go all the way down. Let's go way back up here at the top. So it makes it a little easier. I'm cloning over some of the grass here. So that's, anyway, then I just deselect. Then I can come in here with my healing brush, kind of heal around this area here so that you don't see that. And there you go. So now you have that post where it's not so bright anymore and you can see the edges, and I would fix that. But that's it. You know, you get the idea. Let's see. I think that's it. Anybody else? Questions? Was this helpful?
Yeah.
Every
little
time
bit
you do one of these, I pick up something useful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. That's what it's for. Pick up some useful things. All right. I guess that is it. I don't have anything else I wanted to. So, did you learn something from the resolution thing?
Yeah.
Was that a waste? Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because
I
I
remember it, maybe not, but at least I learned something from it. Hopefully, if I'm in that situation, I'm like, oh yeah, Bob said this.
Well, if you're not doing any printing, then you probably don't have to worry about it too much. But if you're doing printing, then it becomes pretty important. And even then, unless you're printing some pretty big things, you know, it's probably not a big deal. 300 PPI will probably get it for you every time. But just be aware, if you're printing a big print and you're making it 300 PPI, then you're asking Photoshop or somebody to interpolate what those pixels need to be, and you're winding up with like a 200 megapixel file or something. It's way huge. Okay.
All right. Thank you so
All right.
much.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.